Back in 1988, when the Dakar was in its glory years and big traileys were laying the foundations for the adventure bike scene we've got today, Suzuki released the DR Big. We've got an 800S here and we're putting it against the V-Strom 1050 XT. They look the same, but underneath they're pretty different bikes. Welcome to Retro vs Modern, episode 3. Back in 1991, the DR Big was like most big traileys. It was considered a little bit weird, a bit too big for off-road, nowhere near focused enough on the street. It just didn't really fit with what most people were trying to do at the time. It's an 800 single. It pushes around 54 horsepower and it's got about 220 kilos in weight when it's wet. It looks like a Dakar bike from back then, but it was a really long way from what a Dakar bike actually was. And this is a V-Strom 1050 XT. It looks like a DR Big. It was designed by the same guy that designed the DR Big, but what it is not is a DR Big. It's a sport tourer with a slightly more off-road capable chassis, but ultimately it's a street bike. We just finished our review of it and it is an awesome bike, but what it is not is a big trailie. So over the next couple of days, we're gonna see what these two bikes are really good at, what they're not good at, and where the progression is. I think from the start, this episode of Retro vs Modern is a really interesting one because with the DR Big and the V-Strom 1050, Suzuki don't have like a direct lineage between those two bikes. They're not obvious progressions from one to the other like you have with, say, an Africa Twin or with the KTM 950 to 790. Those bikes were very much in the same guise, doing a similar thing X amount of years apart.
DR Big back in the 80s when it first came out, I don't think anyone really paid any attention to it. Like my memory of it was that out of all those kind of big trailies as they were called then, it was kind of the one no one really paid much attention to. It was an odd one out because it was this big single and no one knew quite what it was for or what it was about.
The old bike it felt like exactly what it is. It's a big dirt bike and it just felt exactly like that. A bit soft, a bit wallowy, a bit slow on the uptake with the engine. Like I said, just a big dirt bike basically.
There were a few things that surprised me straight away and surprised me like throughout the test. First of all is how small and light the bike feels. Like I think at one stage I asked what the weight of it was because again, in my memory, you know, all those big trailies, they were massive behemoths of bikes. But now, every time I ride one of the old big trailies, it actually feels pretty small compared to modern adventure bikes and pretty light. And I don't know if that's partly also because they haven't got a lot of power, that they're easy to manage and they feel easy to ride, but it felt really easy to ride.
When you're riding on the road, the engine doesn't outride the frame, which doesn't outride the suspension, because it lets you know that you're reaching the limit of what it wants to do really early. You never get to that point where you're coming into a corner so hot that then suddenly the suspension can't handle it, that suddenly it's just, there's no way you can get out of the situation you're in, which I think with a lot of modern bikes is the reason that we find things where we're frustrated with them and we don't like certain characteristics.
We have been so spoiled with modern brakes. The front brake is terrifying. And it's not terrifying because it doesn't work. It does work. You have to pull the lever very hard for it to work, and there's a big stretch between braking a little bit and actually braking effectively, like you've still got to move it another centimetres. And it's really scary on those sheep-ridden mountain roads, or you come around a blind corner and if there's a tractor there or something, you're just not stopping. So that's like definitely a flip side, terrifying side, which we've forgotten. You know, we're so comfortable and so used to just resting your finger on the front brake lever, and if a sheep runs out, you just stop.
It's deceptively fast, that V-Strom. You wind the power on and you don't really expect it to gain that much speed, but before you know it, you're doing like a fair speed, and it really surprises you. The engine's very, very smooth, and yeah, it's just beautiful to ride, really.
In comparison, the new bike actually has the same kind of fundamentals as the old bike, in that Suzuki have built a very well-rounded package. When we did this test before, one of the things we noticed with the two new bikes, especially on the Africa Twin side, was that the limitations of those bikes were frustrating because they weren't as good as other elements. So the new Africa Twin has a pretty damn quick engine, but because it's got a quick engine and strong brakes, the suspension is massively limited. And so as a bike, it becomes quite frustrating to ride because it doesn't do what you want it to do. Whereas the V-Strom, like the DR Big, is completely the opposite. Everything that Suzuki have put on this bike, be it the new electronics they've upgraded, the suspension, the brakes, the tires, the chassis, in terms of frame and flex and how it feels, they all work in harmony. So it gives you loads of confidence right off the bat. There's really good feedback from the chassis. It's not a weak point. The suspension is really well set up for street riding. It's also really adjustable in terms of the clickers responding massively to when you change them. The tires feel great. The brakes are phenomenal. They're as good as any brakes on any bike, I think, in this class at the moment. And as a package, that works really well. You can definitely see that that's kind of part of Suzuki's characteristics. And I think it's a really cool one. It's a massively underrated thing in the motorcycle industry.
DR Big Offroad is, yeah, like I've kind of said with it as generically, it was a bit of a surprise in that it felt easier to ride than I thought it was going to. It's supposed to be a massive big trailer. It's kind of soft and comfy and cushy, and you're definitely not going to go fast off-road on it. You definitely don't want to go sort of jumping things or hitting bumps fast, because it's got comfy suspension. It's got added suspension in the seat foam, added suspension in the foot peg rubbers, all add up to making it comfy, but not controlled. There's not a lot of control there. So if you want to sit down and bounce down the trail, lovely. Riding position is full 1980s. It's absolutely terrible. Yeah, it's stand up, very rigid, stick straight. I think the foot pegs are directly under the handlebars. I don't think there's any triangulation whatsoever. And the handlebars are like, I don't know, they're like holding on to the edge of the kitchen sink or something. They don't even, there's no flatness at all. They kind of come around, or a pram, maybe it's like pushing a pram.
There's some aspects to it which can definitely go in the bin, like the rubber mounted foot pegs. For sure, like they're in the same category as like pivot pegs to me. Like I just don't want that kind of variable in such an important part as the foot peg when you try and control the bike like that, you know. And when you've got that much movement that the rubber mounted pegs give you, it's just a bit off-putting slightly.
So the V-Strom's being sold and marketed as a bike that's capable of taking you down a gravel road. I think it's not a bike that they've talked about as a full-on hard off-road adventure bike. That gravel bike, I guess initially the first bit of off-road we did, which was just a gravel road that was in a little bit of disrepair, had some potholes and some loose stones flying around, and it made me very nervous initially. I was nervous about the concern of damaging the underbelly. So that's kind of my first concern. And then also when we first rode it, it was actually a little bit scary. The front suspension was kind of non-reactive. And so sometimes it was kind of giving you a little bit of a head shake and like no feedback, no give. But the good news about that was we changed a few settings on the fork. It's proved the fork is very adjustable. Like we were able to totally change the character of the suspension and the handling. And it actually started to feel really good on that sort of said gravel road. I'd feel very comfortable with it as that gravel bike. It definitely won't be able to do more than that because it just runs out of ground clearance, and by the time you put a bash plate on as well, it's just got no ground clearance. And it's a bit of a shame really, because you like their setup, their position. Once we took the rubbers out of the foot pegs, lowered your feet on the foot pegs a little bit, and the foot peg to handlebar relationship and the balance of that to the seat and everything is very natural. It's kind of all good. It's how it needs to be. So it's kind of like, I'm going to say 60% of the way there to being off-road capable, but unfortunately in the guise it comes in now, it's just not. It is a great adventure looking road bike.
Whenever you swap between these two bikes, the absolute biggest thing that becomes apparent to me is how much the little bits of a modern bike have moved on when they're well executed, and they're really well executed on the V-Strom. Those little things for me are how light the clutch is, how light the throttle is, how good the brakes feel, how nice the grips are, the handlebars, the comfort of the riding position, the wind protection. Those are all really little elements, but in 30 years, Suzuki have managed to absolutely nail those. And on the V-Strom, they're as good as any bike in this class. And as a package, it makes it a much easier bike to ride. Like over the course of a day, because the throttle isn't quite as heavy, because the brakes aren't quite as heavy, because getting it to turn consistently and precisely is a bit less effort, you're not having to pull on the brake as hard to get it to stop. It actually is just a much more effortless bike to ride. So when you put in a 150-mile day, I was always finding myself using way less energy on the new bike than the old bike.
I think I enjoyed riding the DR Big the most, to be honest. It's a lot easier to ride. It's a lot more fun to ride for me. If I was doing any sort of big distance, for sure I'd go for the V-Strom over the DR Big. But for what we were doing, just like country lanes, playing about, some light off-road, yeah, the DR Big just did everything, for sure.
I would say I enjoy the new bike more. When I get on the new bike, I feel much safer at the same speed, and definitely if I then want to get on with it, I can get on with it really easily. I really enjoy modern bikes, and I really enjoy the incremental improvement we are lucky to see every year.
If you enjoyed this video, then it would mean a lot to us if you took a look at our sponsor, Barkbusters. Without them, this video wouldn't be happening. They've chosen to help us in a really difficult time, and it means we get to keep making videos. They make some amazing products, including a new all-black handguard, which we've got on the V-Strom, and it looks great. If you want to learn more about that, check out the link in the description below. Retro vs Modern is a series that we are doing on a semi-regular basis. Every couple of months we have a new episode, and the next one that we're planning to do is with Yamaha's Tenere 700 versus one or maybe two of their old models. If you want to see that, or some how-tos, or plenty of other adventure bike reviews, we've got videos coming out all the time. Hit that subscribe button, you get to see way more of my face.
There's so many variables in it. that you don't really need that level of fine tuning. Is that in shot? That's so good.